Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on Forgotten Weapons. I'm Ian McCollum, and today I am joined by the Bloke and the Chap, or we should say Mike and Fabien, from Bloke on the Range, who you guys normally operate out of Switzerland.
Yep.
I normally operate out of the United States. None of us are at home right now. We are all in Finland.
Having been brain probed for
Yes.
viruses and stuff, so we're all clear.
I have gotten many brain probing swabs up the nose.
There are more to come.
Yeah.
Oh yes, there are.
This is all medicinal to keep us healthy.
Yes.
This is because it's Finland, and it's Finnish aged dark gin, which is fantastic. And I think there is a national tradition here of getting slightly hammered in the winter, which is most of the time.
At least we are fully dressed, though, unlike the national tradition.
Yes, unlike national tradition, we are not conducting this Q&A in a sauna naked.
That's for OnlyFans.
All right, so this is a Q&A video, of course, and courtesy of my fantastic patrons, we have a whole pile of questions specifically for you two, some of which I think I will also be answering, but the focus here is to get some answers about what sort of some of the gun stuff as it relates to Europe and specifically Switzerland, as well as your areas of specialty and expertise. So if you guys are not familiar with Bloke on the Range, definitely check them out. Obviously, I'll have a link to their YouTube channel as well as their Patreon in the description text below. And if you like what you hear, maybe it's worth supporting them. Our first question comes from Walker, who says, what do you believe was the most effective first-generation smokeless powder rifle, i.e. Lebel, Gewehr 88, 1889 Schmidt-Rubin, etc.?
Can I answer this straight as a no-brainer? It's the 1889 Schmidt-Rubin by miles.
Okay.
All of the others mentioned there are sticky out bolt handles.
Lee Metford
Well, Lee
carbine
Metford,
isn't.
Right, okay, once we get into the Lee Metford, we haven't got any form of packet loading.
It's true.
The Lebel,
That's
we don't
true.
have any form of packet loading. The Lebel is even worse, it's a tube.
That's true. The early Lees had no clips.
No, that was a post-Boer War
Single
innovation
line, yeah.
from the early 20th century.
It's true.
What the 1889 Schmidt-Rubin had was a 12-round magazine with cardboard charges of 6 cartridges each, and basically, probably, and at some point we will get back onto mad minutes and mad minuting various things, I would reckon probably double the effective rate of aimed fire of the others mentioned there.
I can see that. Yeah.
Because it's a straight pull. You do have to kick your head outside because otherwise
You will punch yourself
you
in the
will
face.
punch yourself in
Yeah.
the face with a cocking ring. But other than that, with all the others, you have to bring your fist up in front of your face. You can't see what you're doing anymore, and close it. And then, Lebel with an 8-round tube can actually be loaded +2, but doctrinally they didn't they?
Right. And that doesn't do you any good once you've expended the
Yeah,
magazine.
once you've done that.
Where the clips help you is reloading the thing,
Yes.
which is why, like, the Vetterli, well, the Vetterli was all black powder, wasn't smokeless.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, never mind.
Well, they did load it from 1891. They loaded it. So but again, it's
But
a
it's
tube
Still
loader.
got to tube it,
yeah.
stuff it.
And you can still got to stuff them one by one. I think that the 1889 Schmidt-Rubin just basically knocks everything else to the curb until quite a bit later.
I've never really been convinced about the increased rate of fire from straight pulls. In my experience, the initial unlocking stroke is so much less efficient that it takes more energy, and it's not any faster to me than opening the bolt.
You are left-handed though, so the difference between that and that is rather different to
Yeah.
That
me,
is
for
true.
instance.
Once you get used to it, it's no effort at all to break
Okay.
that first
Yeah.
Okay.
turn. Yeah.
In the first round of Mad Minute stuff we did, K31 was keeping up with the number 4
Okay.
on the splits. So I did it all on the shot timer so that we could eliminate human error and screw ups and things like that. We could see the shot to shot splits, and I was middle fingering with the number 4, and you can't middle finger the K31.
No.
So I was pushing it forward, and there's a kind of funky, interesting technique to do that. But I was putting the hand back on the semi pistol grip, and was keeping up. And actually, I think it was in terms of accuracy. I think it was a little bit better because I had more control. But it went far faster than I anticipated.
And the earlier Schmidt-Rubins are actually faster than the K31. Aren't they? They're a longer bolt throw, but they're smoother.
I'm not
You don't think
convinced
so?
they vary a lot more.
Okay.
K31s in general are quite slick. I've got some earlier ones that are slick, and I've got some earlier ones that are kind of...
Okay.
Just the earlier ones, you tend, because of the massive bolt, you tend to have, it's easier to throw it forward again, I find, than the K31. The K31, you tend to have to bring it forward all the way, whereas the other one, you just, with your thumb, you can almost just chuck it, throw it shut.
So we're tangenting already on that. What lets the K31 down a bit is the reload, because you've got to go knuckle deep into it.
Yeah.
And in fact, they did it as a two-step thing. You push it down flat, and then you go knuckle deep, as the actress said to the bishop.
Yeah, you see in our videos when we're doing the fell sheets and stuff, we really slick reload, and then the last round we just fail completely. Just,
The earlier ones are much easier.
All right. Jack, kind of following on this Swiss straight pull thing, says, is there any recorded case of any type of Swiss straight pull firearm ever being fired in anger? And I know the answer to this.
Yeah,
But
I might know a different answer to this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, against escaping prisoners of war during World War II.
Okay.
So fired by Swiss people. And a long story that we really don't have time to go into here. But because of German pressure on the Swiss, they weren't keen on being seen to let more people than they could get away with get back over the border, particularly once the US Army pushing up from the south of France had touched the Swiss border. This was terribly embarrassing to people who could have invaded them in a heartbeat.
Dina says, how common are bringback or war trophy firearms in Europe? They are, of course, a major source of military-type rifles in the U.S., especially World War II stuff. The Swiss didn't really go anywhere from which to bring anything back.
No.
I've rarely seen either it was duffel cut and never left France, or for some weird reason was re-imported. I've seen a few. I know of a few in France that exist.
I think it's more barn finds. It's
Yeah.
more. It's more France and barn finds and people finding things in attics that were hidden. And in fact, the old French difficultness with military cartridges was an acceptance that there were barns full of things hiding that were military calibers.
It's not so much brought back, it's the Germans just left them there.
Yeah, they were taken from a German, they were dropped by a German, they were found. And these things still turn up, even today. Bringbacks in the UK were kind of a thing, but with the licensing system, there was a provision for war trophies in the licensing system, but identifying something as such now, unless you had a good provenance on it, forget it, you wouldn't know. It would just be a rifle that would be floating around the civilian market.
Bring back, you say? Yes.
All right. James says, 2 spherical infantry platoons fighting in a vacuum. I'm not sure what he means by spherical. Would you rather have Swiss Cold War weapons, i.e. the Stgw 57, or French Cold War weapons, the FAMAS and its rifle grenades?
Is this the right comparison,
Yeah,
Fab?
this is when we reviewed this. I thought this was a bit of a strange question because the comparison is not that simple.
No.
They do overlap.
They overlap
significantly, but they're not the same generation.
They're not the same generation of firearms. If we start at the beginning, we've got 49, 56, and the Morto.
Just going with his 2, the 57 or the FAMAS.
I would still say the FAMAS.
Yep.
Very good?
Absolutely.
Okay.
No challenge.
Okay, we can continue then. The Sturmgewehr 57 is a beautifully made gun that weighs twice as much as it ought to.
Yep.
Very accurate, but awkward and really heavy.
Yeah, it's built the way it is because it also has to replace the light machine gun and has to fire rifle grenades that weigh more than a kilo, which is like twice the weight of anyone else's rifle grenades, more or less, in general. I'm sure that someone's tapping away in the comments saying that there's some other fairly heavy ones, but in general, they're like twice as heavy.
Because you've got 2 armies which have got a completely different attitude to Cold War.
Yeah.
Offence, defence. Well, defence
And
possibly offence.
The French got it better.
Yeah.
JWL says, what are some good museums in Switzerland and other must-see places for gun people visiting or passing through?
Well, Full Royenthal, that would be the big one. The Schützen Museum in Bern is interesting if you're into the Swiss shooting.
If you're into civilian shooting, it's extremely interesting. Military, not so much.
There's various bunkers that are set up as museums, but getting into them, you've got to sort of know where to look, really.
Solothurn Zeughaus is...
So that first one that you mentioned, where is it? How does one find it?
That one's fairly easy. Full-Royenthal. If you type Swiss Military Museum full, I'm sure it'll auto-complete the rest of it for you. It's kind of the big one.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Thun, I think we actually have to apply before to get to that one.
That's not open easily to the public. You've got to know people.
Because that's also, they have every single rivet button that's ever produced.
Other things to see as a shooter is probably Brunig Indoor, which is a commercial. They basically hollowed out a mountain and made a shooting complex inside it.
Neat.
It comes with a price. I mean, I took Calvin there, Foot Cologne of Firepower United, to show him how to run a bolt action, and that's great. It comes with a certain price, but you can go there as a tourist, and that's Brunig Indoor, BRU with an umlaut, NIG Indoor, and you'll find them easily enough. And if you can't do the umlaut, don't worry, it'll autocorrect.
Find it.
Yeah.
Live in the future.
Does Switzerland do any gun rental ranges? Is that a thing?
Yeah.
Brunig Indoor,
There you go.
You can rent.
Going to Switzerland and need to get your shooting fix?
Commercial ranges will generally, if you provide passport.
Brunig's probably the easiest as a tourist.
Because it's set up as a
commercial
range.
Yeah. So
perfect.
Other smaller ranges, less so, but Brunig is used to catering for tourists.
All right. Joel says, any insights into the dichotomy of 1880s to 1910s rifles having both sights that only go down to 300 or 400 meters and the obsession with having a long and effective bayonet? They thought combat was going to be at exceedingly long ranges, but they also believed in élan and carrying the battle with the bayonet. Did they not realize the disconnect?
I don't think there is a disconnect, to be honest. I think the premise of the question is a bit wrong. They were thinking of combat being from the extreme range that these smokeless cartridges could provide.
All of a sudden,
down, and they were like, wow, we can,
2,000 meters.
We can sight this. Hey, and why don't we mount this crazy thing on the side and we can sight it to 3,600 or whatever? Right, we can do this. Should we do this? We can. We don't care. It's new and brilliant. All the way from there up to bad breath bayonet range, and there's not this disconnect. And actually, some of this relatively long initial sighting is because they weren't that long with the earlier cartridges always. So, for instance, a Gewehr 98 with the Model 88 cartridge, the lowest setting is 200, if I remember rightly. And then when they spitzed it in the early 20th century, to avoid rejigging everything, that lowest setting ends up being 400. The Swiss were different; they had 300 as the lowest setting. What was it with the Vettelis? That's more your period.
I think it was still Schritt in those days, and I think it was 200, but I can't remember what that converts to.
But that's only just supersonic at the muzzle. They're really, it's the last generation black powder cartridge.
There's also an element of mean point blank range, figuring this shoots flat enough that
doesn't matter between that.
Right, out to 300, it's kind of all the same anyway.
Yeah.
You aim at the middle and you might hit high, you might hit low, but you'll still hit the guy.
Yeah. And they're thinking in terms of a standing man
as
the target most of the time at this period anyway. So beyond that, it doesn't really make an awful lot of difference. Once the Spitzer cartridges are in, the difference between 300 or 400 and 0 is just not worth worrying about too much.
All right. David says, have there been any recent changes in Swiss or EU firearms laws or regulations? For example, would it be easier or harder to take your kit to Finland for another brutality match than it was previously?
Do you want to answer this? I don't want to monopolise too much.
No. You know the regulation more than we do.
In terms of bringing stuff up here, nothing's
changed for that.
What has gone in a positive direction is that we can have Category A things now put on a European firearms pass to take them places. The reason why we can do that is they moved a lot of stuff that was previously Category B, like semi-auto rifles with magazines more than 10 rounds. There wasn't any prior concept of magazine capacity. They've been moved from Category B to Category A. What's changed is this magazine capacity nonsense, and it's been implemented very, very differently in each country. The Swiss have done the absolute minimum. Thank you very much, Bundesrat. Germany saw it as an opportunity to do stuff that they've been wanting to do for ages, like have a sort of almost absolute prohibition on new purchases of rifle magazines more than 10 rounds. France, I don't know, have you been...
Yeah, magazines have been regulated for a long time.
But in terms of capacity?
I think they did.
Yeah, I think they did as well. But it was less of an impact because they were linked to the firearms just forever.
Okay.
There were also some changes to the status of full autos converted to semi-auto, weren't there?
Switzerland, that improved.
Yeah.
What they had previously was that down conversions from full auto were always the same status as a full auto, but you could shoot them. So you had to pay a lot of money for the license. They've now made them the same as factory semi-autos in terms of the type of permit you need, but you always need a Type A permit. It's called an Ausnahmebewilligung Klein, for those who are interested in that.
This is why people cry when they see your down-converted Sterling.
Yeah. The thing is, I bought that Sterling as a full auto to show it as a full auto, knowing that I would then get it down-converted to semi-auto so I could shoot it whenever I wanted. So that changed. They introduced basically an intermediate permit between the original Ausnahmebewilligung, which was for full auto and things like that, and not every canton allowed it, and the normal acquisition permit. So it's just this intermediate step. Ultimately, luckily, thank you Bundesrat again, luckily they didn't cause massive issues, and in fact the fact that we can now down-convert interesting things. I have a Chartered Industries SAR-80 down-converted. That's been a positive side of it. Overall, I wish it hadn't happened, but it did. So we got to look at both sides of it. It wasn't all bad. There was a bit of each way.
Yeah, on the European scale, it's really country to country. So
yeah,
right.
It's supposed to be harmonised, but
they didn't, of course.
Bruce says, "What has been the reaction of the success of your channel to the local shooting community, and how about to the government authorities? Do you get recognised on the street?
Yeah. On the street? No.
We've both been recognised in gun shops.
Yeah.
And at gun ranges.
Yeah.
Nice.
Apparently some people at the Waffenbüro in the canton Bern.
Because they see our paperwork a lot.
I wonder why that might be.
Oh, it's these guys again.
Yeah.
Apparently a couple of those guys watch our stuff. We've not had any negative feedback from authority or...
I can't imagine
otherwise.
You would.
No, I mean, we try and keep it...
You're not exactly advocating the overthrow of the Swiss government.
No. We just like cool old cats.
Yeah. All right. Edward wants to know, he says, I have an M1917 and a number 4 Mark I, and my friend has an SMLE and a P14, and we constantly argue over which is the better rifle in military standard issue scenarios. Would love to hear about you on this question. I think you actually pretty much covered this in a Q&A.
Yeah, I did. In our Christmas Q&A. We don't do many Q&As, we should do more.
But a lot of these folks haven't seen that.
Yes.
So what's the short version?
The short version is the number 4 does basically everything that the P14 does over the SMLE and everything the SMLE does over the P14.
Okay.
So everything that the P14 does better than the SMLE, the number 4 does, and everything that the SMLE does better than the P14, the number 4 does.
So the answer is number 4.
The answer is the number 4 is by far the best rifle of all of...
Well, I mean, no, the answer is still the 1917 is the best rifle.
Well, that's just a P14 in some unholy American caliber.
Unholy, actually rimless caliber, yes.
Yeah.
With an extra round, although that doesn't, 6 instead of 10.
Yeah,
but
and when your doctrine is load 5, shoot 5, load 5, shoot 5.
It's a backup tactical round. I really like my 1917.
I know you do. I know you do.
I think it's largely because I've always had bad luck with SMLEs, which I think is largely because I've never had SMLEs that are quite as nice as my 1917. They're rather more abused.
I think an awful lot of the British military surplus that made it to the US was the stuff that was one step up from dumped at C grade.
It's better than that, but it is a 1916 SMLE, and it probably did not survive the first 2 years of its life unscathed.
Yeah, and then was probably used in the interwar period.
Yeah.
It will have had a hard life.
Yeah.
They tend to have been used a lot.
So I recognize that my position is perhaps a bit biased, but that does not change my position. And I would still take my 1917.
Fair enough. If we have Buddy here, Buddy has a 1917 with a warped stock, and the barrel bears on the top instead of the bottom. So as it heats up, it just walks.
Yeah.
Let's just say at 300, this was not fun. We're trying to get it zeroed, and it wouldn't zero because it just walked as it warmed up. Have you discovered that the M1917 magazines are cartridge overall length sensitive?
No, I've never hand-loaded for it.
Well, I haven't hand-loaded for mine either, but I had some 1950s Kynoch. Now, because the Brits had an awful lot of 30-06 machine guns from Lend-Lease and so on, Browning 1919s, and Kynoch loaded a lot of ammunition for them, and it's loaded to a short overall length. And what happens is, under recoil, they walk forward in the magazine, and after a couple of shots, they won't feed anymore.
Interesting.
It's actually a really... That was a surprise. I got a little snippet video of this. I'm sure you can probably find it using the search function. But it was one of these, what the... what's going on here? And then I looked at it and thought, that's a bit short compared to the magazine box, and compared it to some Privy, which is loaded to US service overall length. I was like, yeah, that's quite a bit shorter. Better not use that stuff anymore.
Yeah, interesting. Lumpy Tusk says...
That's a cool name.
American viewers see a lot of guns on Bloke on the Range they want, but can't have or are priced out of. AAF2. F1. Anything that you guys see looking the other way across the Atlantic? This is really a softball of a question.
Yeah, well, it just so happens that we're currently in the process, well, I'm currently in the process of importing 2 meme guns. Well, at least one's a meme gun, the other one's definitely a cool gun. A Bushmaster M17S and a Leader T2 Mark V to go with my later Australian automatic arms. And let's do a little plug for Les while we're at it.
Les Winner.
Yeah, Les Winner of Polaris Worldwide is sorting the US side of that, and Matt Ruefley of M426.ch in Switzerland is handling the Swiss end of it, and it's going swimmingly. So check those guys out if you ever need to get something one way or the other.
Les is also the guy who got my rifle and pistol here for Finnish Brutality, or what's left of Finnish Brutality this year.
Yeah.
So I'll have a separate video with him talking specifically about what's involved in international import and export. It's interesting to me that in many ways, although you have to go through more paperwork to own it, you can import more things from the US than we can import from Europe.
Yeah.
I couldn't import a leader because it would be considered a non-sporting firearm.
You couldn't import my Chartered Arms SAR-80 because it's an NFA.
Good heavens no, because that's used to be a machine gun.
Yeah.
And frankly, even if it was a factory semi-auto, I couldn't import it because it is a non-sporting weapon.
And also the import procedure for Switzerland is pretty much the same for everything.
Yeah.
You don't have to go through multiple different routes depending on what it is. It's just you go, this is the procedure, follow it to the end, that's it.
It would be nice if we had that.
But basically what we don't have much access to is US civilian stuff, specific stuff. I mean, the What Was Stoner Do 2020 rifle, hopefully Brownell's Europe is going to be bringing them into the old world.
I hope so, yes.
I really hope so.
I mean, we're planning on it.
Yeah, shoot one for the first time at the weekend, and I hope the hype is real.
Hype is real.
Yeah.
Is it real in -10?
We'll find out. So stuff like that, the Brownell's retro line, I was really miffed that none of that came over, but we'll see in the future when my gun buying budget has pricked back up again if I can get one of their AR-10s.
Yeah.
It's stuff like that.
I think, yeah, it's things that are popular in the US and then don't make it anywhere else because it's popular enough in the US and they don't bother.
Okay.
I guess.
Yeah.
If you wanted a specific model of AR where there wasn't an importer, I mean, Wyndham, who do they used to be?
Bushmaster.
They're imported, so that's not a big issue. But anyone that doesn't have a big importer, like if I wanted a JP match AR or something, I couldn't get that.
Okay.
Aside from by doing an import,
Private import.
Private import.
Okay.
Because not all the manufacturers have bulk importers
Right.
on the continent. I mean, fundamentally, once it's somewhere in continental Europe, we can get it into Switzerland.
Yeah.
But if it's not, we can't.
Okay. So your access to military surplus type stuff,
It's fine, right?
if you assume that it's basically from all of Europe, like you can you have as much access to a variety as we do.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. You got to find it.
Yeah. I mean, with the old stuff that we're mostly interested in, yeah, it's just a question of finding it somewhere.
Okay.
And in terms of modern stuff, is it being imported in bulk or not, or is it just a question of you have to throw money at it?
Okay.
Yep.
Tony wants to know, how are ammo prices in Switzerland? Also, are they stable or are they subject to demand spikes like those in the US right now?
No, they're not. There's been no ammo shortage, partly because there's no way to shoot it.
Yeah, at the moment, yeah.
But even, I mean, you can still, obviously now online, but you can order whatever.
What will happen is that the US sourced ammo will dry up short term. So I've got a couple of cans of Frontier M193 equivalent.
Got that when I was over. Yeah.
There's still some of that kicking around, but once that's dried up, we're not going to get that until the US market has calmed itself down. But most of the ammo on the market here is produced in Europe.
Yeah.
Okay.
The Ruag, SMB,
Privy, and then very expensive Hunty stuff, RWS, things like that.
Yeah.
I went shooting with one of our Finnish hosts yesterday, and not having any of my guns in the country yet, he just handed me a pistol and dumped like 12 full 18-round magazines in what in the US right now would be this just massive flex of, oh, I don't need this $1,000 worth of ammo, here you go. And for once, like, the tables have turned. It was significantly cheaper to do that here in Finland than it would be in the US. Normally it's kind of the other way around.
Yeah, normally we pay more for ammo than you guys do in the US. Tables have turned for a bit, they'll turn back again.
Yeah.
I mean, just as a general rule, in Switzerland, 55 grain 223 bulk mass market stuff runs a bit less than 50 Swiss cents.
Oof.
And 308 similar, if it's sort of M80 ball equivalent. Once you get into exotics, which is basically everything else, you're starting from about £1 a round.
Wow. Do you know the exchange rate? What's the exchange rate to the euro right now?
Euro.
About one and a bit to the euro, and it's about 0.9 to the dollar. The Swiss franc's super high.
Super high at the moment.
Okay.
The subsidised ammo that's available on ranges for use on ranges, that's a different matter. That runs at 35 to 50 cents.
Oh, that's cool.
GP11.
Our GP11, which everyone's jealous of.
Yes.
We can go out to the range and you have to shoot it there.
Yeah.
But you can shoot it. Yeah.
I need more of that.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Evan says FAL versus G3.
FAL.
Why?
Yeah.
Which and why?
FALs don't punch me in the face.
Okay.
They have less recoil, they have better ergonomics, they have better control layout, they don't require you to go to cock. Apparently the spur upgrade on the G3 is a game changer.
Yes.
I've not yet had the pleasure. I would like to have the pleasure. I'm wondering if it's enough of a game changer with the whole cocking movement, but we'll see. But the general bog standard G3 versus bog standard FAL isn't really a...
Yeah, my last experience of that was Denmark.
Both G3s broke.
Where I was a noob to both, and the G3 was deeply unpleasant.
I mean, they were shagged out old early ones with wooden furniture. They were Danish Home Guard, and both of them broke.
Yeah. Launching the brass into orbit.
So we loaned out my L1A1 that I had at the time.
Which was lovely, yeah.
As a replacement. And this home guard guy who was all, G3's great, was like, that's really nice.
Why didn't we get them?
So I have actually come to the point where I prefer the G3. Now that is in large part because I have a spore stock, and it does not punch me in the face, and the overall length is like 2 inches shorter as a result. It is handier. I have an improved trigger in mind, so the trigger's not quite as crap as a stock G3, which is quite crap.
Yeah.
I think there's also an interesting element in the US of most of our guns are parts kit builds, because we can't import real G3s even in semi-auto or real FALs. However, for whatever reason, it's easier to make an American-made G3 receiver that will work when you bolt in the bits you can get from a parts kit that are original HK production.
Okay.
On the FALs, that lower receiver has just historically been a problem for a lot of manufacturers, and we have a lot of built FALs that just don't run reliably.
Interesting. Because the parts kit thing is a specific US thing due to
Right.
specific
Yeah.
weird
Well,
legislation.
it's what we just talked about. We cannot down convert a machine gun to a semi-auto. So we don't, with the exception of a very small number of original FN imports and original HK imports, we have very few factory FALs and G3s. Not counting companies like PTR that bought out original tooling and make the guns in the US now.
DSRs.
Right. DS Arms is not using FN tooling. They've got their own tooling. It's kind of a G3 thing with the stamping tooling.
Rumour had it that DS Arms have bought the Austrian STG 58 tooling.
Maybe they did. I could be wrong on this. I know they bought a lot of the parts. I don't know if they bought the actual tooling.
I don't
Perhaps
know
they
for
did.
certain. This was rumour circulating a long time ago when they were setting up to do this.
Even accounting for DSA, we have a ton of Century FALs that are just not reliable.
Okay. Whereas in our experience, we're talking about originals.
Right.
Yeah.
Whether made by FN or in Austria. And with the G3s, they could be
A proper licensed
a
subcontractor.
proper, a lot of them
Manufacturer.
Turkish on the market, that sort of thing.
So I've come to like the G3 largely because of the stock and because I've had better luck with G3 clones being reliable than FAL clones. But I recognize that I think that is anomalous because of the US situation.
That's interesting. I never thought of it that way.
Yeah.
I just worry about
I have,
the thumb selector I can't reach with my thumb. And things like
See,
that.
I'm left-handed. A lot of the FALs, the selector sits really unpleasantly under my trigger finger. And the G3 doesn't do that because it's, halfway around the other side of the gun.
Yeah.
You can't reach it anyway, but
I could imagine that with an L1A1 with that beautifully contoured thumb safety for a right-hander, there's almost a palm. It's almost a thumb rest. Although the training manual said, "Do not do that. Put your thumb underneath." I could see how that would actually be a real pain in
the Israeli one especially. That thing's like a big pokey lump under your trigger finger.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've had in my hands a Saint-Étienne produced G3.
Nice. I know those are out there. I've seen them. I'd love to have one, but I never will because they're all machine guns.
Yeah, I could, but I couldn't. I won't.
The divorce papers would be filed.
Exactly.
Let's see. Ready, Fire, Aim says a history buff friend asked to go shooting, but they have never shot a firearm before. Which exciting but historical rifles, pistols, or machine guns would you have them trying out so that after shooting they exclaim, "Jolly good show, old chap"? It doesn't have to be a firearm you currently have access to. But if you're going to introduce someone, what do you think is going to guarantee an enjoyable, happy time?
Good question. I think what we did introduce two on the channel. The first one being Lindy Beige.
Okay.
And the second being Bismarck of military history, aviation history.
Yeah.
Sorry, Chris.
Yeah.
And both of them ran, amongst other things, my Italian 308 M1 Garand.
Okay.
And Chris certainly exclaimed that was a jolly good show, despite being a German. Lloyd liked it, but he tried to get out of it. Sorry, Lloyd, you did. I think that's the one, rifles-wise, I like to put people behind. What was hilarious was after getting Chris Bismarck, he tried to get out of it. Sorry, Lloyd, you did. I think that's the one, rifles-wise, I like to put people behind. What was hilarious was after getting Chris Bismarck, he tried to get out of it. Sorry, Lloyd, you did. I think that's the one, rifles-wise, I like to put people behind. What was hilarious was after getting Chris Bismarck, on target with the M1 was put him behind a 98k with heavy ball ammo.
And here is your cultural heritage.
Yeah. He swore on camera.
It's not ingrained.
Yes, it's not in the blood. Momentum is real. And handguns wise, well, Lloyd was a natural handgun shooter, which is not fair because some of us had to work at it. He was an absolute natural, and I put him behind various things, and he had a good time with all of them.
Yeah, I think something big and soft like 455 Webley and Mark 6.
A Fosbury.
Yeah, a Fosbury. No,
You used to have a Fosbury, didn't you?
didn't I? Yeah, but a Mark 6 because it's just soft.
So I would go with a suppressed 22. Frankly, either rifle or pistol.
Yeah.
And a tripod-mounted heavy machine gun.
Oh, they bring a smile to everyone's face. For the ammo.
You put a brand new shooter behind, say, a Hotchkiss 1914, and they don't have to deal with recoil. They don't have to deal with the weight of holding a gun up. It's just pull the trigger and and yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. Expensive.
Yes.
I would also say that give them a shot with a musket as well.
Yeah, black powder.
You have to load it for them, but
Okay.
get them to fire a shot, at least one.
Big smoke clouds.
Yeah, big smoke cloud, big fireball, soft recoil.
And don't make them clean it.
Yeah. Sphinx says 7.5 Swiss or 303 British. Which would you prefer for competition and which for combat, assuming you have a preference?
Sorry, this is another one where I'm not quite sure of the premise of the question. Because they're integrated with the rifles that they come in. Now, for target shooting anywhere other than Switzerland, you're not going to chamber anything in 7.5 Swiss.
This is true.
For target shooting anywhere in the world, for pure target shooting, you're not going to chamber anything in 303 at all, because why would you? I mean, fundamentally, ballistically, 7.5 GP11 is the same as 303 Mark 8, the Vickers gun round. Contrary to popular belief, can be used in the rifles. Tons of it came on the market just before I left the UK. Military privy made. Came in a couple boxes in Greece, and it was awesome stuff. But it's chucking a 174, 175 grain bullet at 25, 50-ish feet per second either way. 303 Mark 7, same bullet. Well, there isn't 303 Mark 7 anymore, aside from a few people who've got some from back in the day. Yeah, I mean, I would choose on the rifle, not on the caliber.
Okay. I would personally go with 7.5 Swiss, just because it's rimless and a more modern design. All else being a blank slate. I don't see anything I could do with 303 that I couldn't do equally well with 7.5, and it's better outfitted for things like box magazines. But I'm not sure what the relevance of the question is.
That's almost fighting talk, that is.
Yeah.
Bring it on. Timothy says, any recommendations for what one can do to make a decent shooter out of a cut-down, sporterized SMLE without sourcing an original for stock and hardware?
Source a decent repro stock. You're going to have to. We're going to have to be.
Oh, I think we've opened
specific about this. That we're talking about the SMLE specifically, and presumably a Mark III or Mark III stock.
He says SMLE.
SMLE. So we're going to take it as read that it is SMLE.
Number 1 Mark III.
Yeah. They have this build a better mousetrap bedding system to make that skinny little barrel shoot well, and they need it. And there's all sorts of stocking up tests they did in the 30s, and all the time trying to think, can we simplify this? And the answer was no. It always, everything they tried didn't work as well as the service stocking up. The way they packed them for target shooting, they tried this several times, and they shoot very, very, very well when packed properly. But it's not suitable for service conditions, presumably heat and water and things like that then screw it up. They tried it. It's a question, I think it's in Hesketh Pritchard's book, Sniping in France. I might be wrong, it's a long time since I read the book, but there was a comment about why don't we set these up like the target shooters do, and the answer is it doesn't work well in service conditions, so all weather, all temperature, all of that. You might try shimming between the tip of the stock and the barrel. That might work, but those barrels are really too light for it. They need all those springs and nonsense. Basically, the stocking up system predates the 1903 Springfield, which was the one that absolutely nailed how to do it.
Okay. So you're going to have to get a handguard.
You're probably going to have to get a new stock set and try and fit it. And the problem is that with fitting it, there's so much know-how that's lost. If you read the instructions for armourers, for fitting a new stock, it's kind of basic, and you just know that there's just that's like 1% of what goes into it, and the rest is all lost.
Hand me down. Yeah.
There's some guys in the UK that can still do it.
Okay.
But it's a finicky thing.
Fringe Division, we're going back to Swiss here, wants to know, why have the Swiss been the most consistent in adopting straight pull bolt action designs? Is it a matter of increased cost for other countries compared to traditional bolts? Do you see straight pull actions ever making a comeback on the civilian market?
Well, they have.
They have. Savage has copied a German design.
That is true.
They have, was it Haim?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm bad with names. They presented it as this new shiny thing, and they just copied a Haim action. Why does Swiss adopt straight pull? Because Colonel Rudolf Schmidt had friends in high places.
This is often the answer to questions like this.
It was his baby. He could influence the people making the decisions on it.
This is actually exactly why the Canadians adopted the Ross.
Basically.
Ross had the right connections.
Yeah. And Sig complained, and there's some sarcastic, very sarcastic notes of the phrase used is Freunden in den Raten, which literally is friends on the councils, but it's probably most naturally translated as friends in high places. So he could influence it, and then it's cost. And once you're in and you're in a militia army, there's going to be a lot of bureaucratic inertia of not wanting to make a massive change, and so we end up with the progression which retains the original core. And the K31 looks from the outside quite different, but it's fundamentally it's got the same building blocks. And surprisingly, Führer, who did the work on it, didn't put a toggle lock in it.
He was weak for a moment.
Yeah. And it's cost. I mean, from a user's perspective, they're far better than the Mannlichers.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
From a manufacturing perspective, not.
The Swiss have never really shied away from complex manufacturing.
No.
See also every gun that Führer designed.
And in terms of on the civilian market, there's the Savage, there's the Haim, there's Blaser with their various straight pulls. So they're out there. Mauser has one. I can't remember the model number, but Mauser has a straight pull from back in the 90s. I think it was.
I think on the civilian market, there's always just this very subconscious issue that people think it's gonna hit me in the face.
Yeah.
Like
there's no visible locking system.
Right. And I kind of understand that. Like you know intellectually that it is safe and it locks, but you can't actually see it doing that.
Yeah.
And I think that just kind of unnerves some people.
Yeah, you get a lot of comments sometimes under videos of I can't trust the straight pull. Okay.
No.
Fair enough, but I mean we should.
Here are the locking lugs. They're going somewhere.
Yeah.
Now I have run one of those Rosses, deliberately reassembled,
Yeah.
Yes.
and those locking lugs did not go anywhere useful. Although interestingly, the bolt still didn't actually come out of the rifle because it caught on the bolt stop, which I had not anticipated.
You need a surgeon to remove it from your face.
Depends how. If you were up close on that, yeah, you would have.
There's a long bolt stroke on those.
An advantage to us left-handers. Wait,
Doesn't
no.
matter. The bolt's
Wrong
side.
coming. The bolt's coming through. The bolt's
Look
coming
down the
out the way.
Well, the bolt handle's sticking out the side. Doesn't help. Bo says, keeping in line with your my recent run on the early SMLEs, which models or variants of the long-lived Lee Enfield family tree are your respective favorites? From the Lee Metford to the very last of the L42A1 and the Ishapores.
SMLE Mark 5.
Okay.
It's my favourite. Because it combines the handling of the earlier action with a decent set of sights. It's one of my grow guns. I will find one for a price I'm willing to pay, but I don't have one yet. I think that's they're the coolest. They're the most interesting from a historical perspective. There were like 20,000 of them made.
Right.
And it was actually should we do a conversion program? There's a lot of misunderstanding of what they are. But it's actually a revisitation of something they did on a much, much smaller scale pre-World War I. Because the Brits were early at looking at proper aperture sights close to the eye, and then war were declared and it all went wrong. And I'm actually, when I've got the time, real life gets in the way unfortunately, I'm going through the Small Arms Committee minutes, tracing the whole thing, and literally the SMLE Mark 5 project just starts from a little note of we've got some budget and there's this like thing we did prior to World War I. Should we do that? Should we look at that again? Okay. And then ultimately at the end of that we end up with the trials version of the number 4 Mark 1. And it's terribly man in a shed. The whole progression is very man in a shed, but where the shed is a state arms factory, and they can do a trial of 20,000 gun trial run, and it's crazy. And in Skeleton, it's like that.
Yeah,
it's way more interesting than in Skeleton.
And yours?
I have no opinion really, positive or negative of the SMLE.
Because it's not French.
Yeah. I appreciate them for what they are, but I couldn't name a favourite. Yeah.
Interestingly, I would have given the exact same answer. The only thing that might upset it is not a standard pattern, but a one-off that I found in a collection that when this comes out, the video will be about 2 weeks old. A number 5 Mark 1 built out of a number 1 Mark 5. So a jungle carbine that was actually an experimental trials rifle built from a number 1 Mark 5 action.
And there's a photograph of one in Skeleton.
Yes. I think it's the same rifle that I did a video on.
Possible.
And that's just cool because it's a carbine. I like carbines. I really like the number 1 Mark 5.
Interesting. Have you seen the photos? There's a photo of someone in Indochina somewhere with an SMLE Mark 5.
Huh. No, I have not seen
that. And it's either Vietnam or Cambodia. It's somewhere around there. And it's a photo that you can find it on Google image search. And it's one of those head scratches of how did that end up there?
There's a lot of that.
Yeah.
Let's see. Matthew says... okay. Matthew says, what reasoning did the Swiss use to choose calibers similar, but not exactly the same, to NATO calibers? I learned from your videos, I think he means my videos, that P-26 and Swiss military, no, this would be your videos, collaborated with NATO forces despite being neutral in the Cold War, so why not share common ammo?
Okay, so the only Swiss cartridges adopted post-World War II are 5.6mm GP90, which
is 5.56.
5.56, and more recently 338 Lapua Magnum.
So what you're saying is the whole premise of the question is founded erroneously.
Yeah. Sorry.
GP11 predates NATO.
Yeah, it predates NATO by a long way. It's a legacy cartridge. It's still in the system because there are still MG51s. Yep, MG51s that run it, and it's still used in the shooting, out of service shooting. 9mm Para was adopted during World War II. That is the Pistolenpatrone 41, because they adopted that for submachine guns. Finnish Connection, they adopted
Suomis. Yeah.
Because, it took a lot longer than planned to build those fur submachine guns. Weird, who could have guessed that?
Yeah. But of course, the Swiss version of the Sten is a Suomi. And then there was a question of, do we go to an intermediate cartridge? There was all sorts of stuff on that. Ultimately, they said no. It was a bit of a Russia, the Hungarian Revolution, getting smacked down by the Soviets was a big deal. So there's we're sticking with the legacy cartridge. That legacy cartridge went through, and then the only other cartridge adopted was a NATO cartridge with a different bullet, because it's a conventional FMJ, but it's 100% NATO compatible.
It's not that dissimilar from why didn't the French adopt 7.62 NATO? Well, the 7.5 French does exactly the same thing, and it predates 7.62 NATO by a couple decades.
Yeah. But then they did later. They did convert AA-52s.
Right. They tried to convert the 4956.
Yeah.
It did not go well.
Didn't work.
Yeah. Lars said, what are some guns that surprised you either positively or negatively? Fabien?
Well, the G3 surprised me negatively. And the FAL positively. Oh, sorry. SLR, should I say?
It's the FAL.
SLR. Otherwise, what really surprised me was the difference between the SIG 540 and the 550. Well, 550, I've used it as a 300 meter Swiss range gun, matches, and it is what it is because it's authorized. And then you shoot the 550 and you think, oh my god, what did they do to the 540? You think, why did they do to the 550? Why did they add all this mass? Well, I know why they did it, but you appreciate what it cost.
Okay.
In terms of how light it is, how snappy the action is. Sights are pretty much the same, but overall you get a much better feeling. And the Swiss that have handled mine have also said, why didn't we have this?
Just to put this in an American perspective, the SIG 540 to the 550 is the M16A1 to the M16A2.
Okay.
Like everything they added to improve the M16A2 detracted from it as a combat rifle.
Right.
And it's very much a very, very similar relationship between the two.
Well, yeah, I mean, the 540 bipod is horrible.
Well, all Swiss bipods are horrible and nasty and floppy.
There's a horrible nylon nut to hold it on, and the plastic furniture is, you look at it and you think it's could break.
Yes. I've handled a couple. Unfortunately, 540s are very scarce in the United States.
Yeah.
I've been trying to get one, and I haven't pulled it off yet.
And they reworked the disassembly, which was, for field use, is necessary, because it is fiddly.
Okay. It's still fiddly. The 550 disassembly in the gas system is still...
It's much more awkward because you have to basically remove the whole gas block to get into the 540.
Yeah. That was a surprise to me when I took one apart.
Yeah.
Like, this is the first time field stripping has involved pulling the gas block off the rifle.
Yeah, exactly.
And for me, well, we were discussing at dinner, something that surprised me negatively was the Swiss LMG-25, the Führer 7.5 by 55 Luger machine gun, basically, on its side.
Giant Luger.
What can't be bad about that?
Yeah. Basically, I think it's a little bit early. It's a little bit ahead of the...
It is quite early.
Yeah.
It predates the ZB-26.
Yeah.
It predates the Degtyarev.
But it doesn't predate the FM-24.
Right.
Which is a much better... But then the FM-24 is a BAR in a better package.
Right.
Basically, the Swiss have a thing with nasty floppy bipods. Nasty floppy long bipods to track moving targets and to shoot up and down more easily, but it means that the bipods are nasty and floppy. It's recoil operated because it's basically a Luger pistol on its side, scaled up.
Right.
What happens when you pull the trigger is that there's an enormous amount of weight that moves, and the thing just bounces around. And you see an awful lot in photos from the Second World War era, in particular, of them being mounted on a tripod or used from the hip. Because I suspect that off the bipod they were not terribly effective, because I mean, most machine guns, when you shoot them, at least the first round goes where the sights are, and then the rest of the burst does whatever it's going to do, depending on how good you are and the dynamics of the other machine gun. This just it's just like and it's just unfortunately horrible. There will be one in my life at some point.
I would love to have one.
Yeah, because they're super cool,
right,
and they're super crazy, and only the Swiss would do that. No, only Fur.
Only Fur would do that. Yes.
But they are surprisingly disappointing overall.
Okay.
M16, because I grew up on all this FUD law, this Vietnam era FUD law, all the books were written by people who'd imbibed from that cup. I was like, and my first AR-15 was an H-bar. And then the first time I shot an early AR-15/M16 with pencil barrel and what have you, I was just like, this is awesome. This is just,
that's what the platform was meant to be.
Yeah, this is just absolutely fantastic. This is superb. This is I'm now worshipping at the fount of this.
On that note, I am very excited to be able to put a What Would Stoner Do in your hand.
So excited.
Yeah.
You can put one in my hand.
So hopefully, like this weekend.
Yes.
Which would have been about a couple weeks ago when you're actually seeing this. So you'll already know, but we don't. Next up, Chinley says, are there any significant examples of factories that manufactured SMLEs or SMLE parts that were not originally firearms manufacturers? Like how we had a wide diversity of industrial companies making guns in the U.S. He brings up Singer and Union Switch and Signal for 1911s, but then we have stuff like Rockola and Postal Meter and GM. Is there any of that with the Enfield?
As far as the SMLE itself is concerned, no. I will expand in a minute, assuming that people are using SMLE for the whole family. But the SMLEs were produced by big manufacturers, and there was also what's called the pedaled scheme, which was smaller gunsmiths making parts. It never worked out quite as well as they planned, but it was basically a consortium of Birmingham gunsmiths that made bits, but they were all gun makers. Small parts for the SMLE, I don't know if they were ever out subcontracted. For the number 4 during World War II, yes, very much. Lots of subcontracting. Singer, there's a misnomer that the Mark 1 rear sight is a Singer sight. Singer did make them. You can identify them because they have N67 on.
Oh, naturally, N67 for Singer, of course.
North 67, because we don't want people to find out. It's like S42 for Mauser. Like, no one will find out what S42 is. No one will find out that that's Mauser Obendorf. We're going to put S42 on these rifles, and no one will find out. But yeah, small parts were.
Okay.
But in terms of complete rifles,
it's pretty much just a couple of big arsenals.
Yeah, and they were the number 4 facilities were all set up to produce the number 4 during World War II, exclusively, and they were either set up from scratch. Long Branch, I don't think. Small Arms Limited. I think Small Arms Limited was set up to do that. I'm not sure. Don't quote me on that. But anyway, yeah, new facilities. Some of them, like Savage, were always rifle manufacturers.
Right.
Or it's BSA, or it's a state arsenal like Maltby, or later for Zachary.
Claude says, thanks to technical advances in the last few decades, 9mm has pretty much made all larger handgun calibers obsolete for self-defense in the U.S. However, here in Switzerland, expanding projectiles for handguns are banned, so no hollow points and only very few jacketed soft point rounds available. In this context, are 45, 10mm, or even 40 Smith & Wesson superior for defensive purposes, or would you stick with 9mm?
Sorry, I'm going to have to correct you on the legal thing. There's a naughty list. We're not allowed good hollow points. We're allowed bad hollow points. You can buy Fiocchi Black Mamba, 9mm and 38 special. There's a very, very specific 4-point test for what goes on the naughty list. Fiocchi is not good enough to get on the naughty list. And there's others. Have a look at munitionsdepot.ch and you'll see various types of self-defense ammo that are bad enough to be legal in Switzerland.
Is there any actual carry allowed in Switzerland?
Yeah, I have some friends that have carry permits through their work, but getting one as a normal peon, forget it. Yeah. You would struggle to justify it. Basically, if it's not for professional reasons, you are unlikely to be able to justify it unless there's serious threats. But on the other hand, it's a very, very safe country, so it's not the end of the world. And to the general point, any hit is better than a miss. And I think that all of these caliber wars from back in the day, which still go on endlessly, is nothing compared to shot placement.
I would tend to agree with that.
And this applies for hunting and what have you. I mean, we on our channel we don't comment on things like self-defense, but I think as a general principle, shot placement counts more than anything else.
Yeah.
So if you can hit with it,
the bullet construction is less important. Yeah. I tend to agree with that.
Yeah.
Man, Fabien, we've pretty much just left you out of all these questions.
Well, it's not my field. So.
Everybody hears Bloke on the Range and they think, it must be all British. And I got no French questions.
Never mind.
Oh. I have one more here, and that is from Matteo, and this one is nationality neutral.
Okay.
What is the best breech loading conversion system?
Ooh, that's a tough one.
This is definitely not my
breech.
bailiwick.
I'll start you off. Yeah. It is not the Trapdoor Springfield.
Yeah, I've played with the Spanish version of that, the Bodan version, which was okay, although it had a really funky cartridge ejection spring system. I don't know if you handle one of those.
No, I have not.
It's got a sort of funky U-spring which is pre-charged when you chamber. So that when you open the trapdoor, it boing, boing, and there's a little ramp at the back. It'll work until the spring fails because
actually, now that I'm thinking about it, the trapdoor is not that bad.
No.
It ejects at least.
It does.
Unlike a Snyder where you have to tip it.
Yeah, and the main issue is the ejection. Most of them don't bother.
Right.
They'll extract, and then it's up to you to flip it or hook it. Or
tabatiere is not great.
Tabatiere is not great. And the millbanks are not bad.
Okay.
This is Trapdoor Springfield type.
Yeah, but the locking system is quite clever. Using a camming action.
He's done some great videos on them.
Yeah, and that actually does eject as well. The same like a Springfield, just scoops it out with the side ejector.
Would it be the Carcano needle fire as a conversion?
Yeah, I suppose you could. I didn't even consider that as a conversion, but yes, you're right.
But you shouldn't, because it's a terrible conversion.
It's a terrible conversion, but yeah.
It's pretty cool, but no.
But in that case, I would consider probably the Mauser muzzleloader 1857 converted to needle fire.
Okay.
With the Beck breech steel.
Okay. Now, in a practical sense, that can't compete with a metallic cartridge.
No, it still can't, but that wasn't the question. If we're talking about first generation
he does not.
Cartridge, there's something else.
Yeah, just what is the best breech loading conversion system?
Yeah, so in that case, I would stick with a Beck Dreiser.
All right. That is all the questions that we have, which is good because I have to get up early in the morning to go film some more Finnish guns. Thank you guys very much for joining me here.
Well, thank you for having
No
us.
problem, thank you.
If you enjoyed any of the subject matter in here, you should definitely check out Bloke on the Range. They have videos both in English and in French for those of you who are Francophiles. Although if you only speak French, you're probably not watching this video, but...
I think you'd be surprised.
Maybe, possibly. That's all I got. We've got a bunch of cool content coming up because Mike and Fabien have just arrived. We're going to be going out to the range and doing some shooting to make up for, we're doing a small component of what would have been Finnish Brutality this year, which has been unfortunately canceled due to COVID event size restrictions. So the real Finnish Brutality has been postponed to October. So we'll see if we can make it back for that. I don't know yet if that's going to fit my schedule, but I hope so. At any rate, hopefully you guys enjoyed this. Thanks for watching.